what's up, Liron here. Thank you for joining me in another video, and today we're going to talk about the color of shadows, which is something I know a lot of people have issues with. What's the color of the shadow? How do I paint the shadow? So I'm going to give you a demo, 3 quick boxes. I'm going to show you how 3 different ways of shading them to look good. Now I will give a quick beginner's tip here. If your goal is to paint like you see it, then there are plenty of tools to sample the color and try and match that accurately. We're gonna sidestep that. I want to show you the principles behind it. So I'm actually just gonna draw a real quick couple of boxes here. So that's gonna be 1. Now let me show you how I shade these. So one way would be to do it kind of monochromatically. So we're gonna use grays here. So let me show you what I mean by that. Grays and a bit of blues. So top part, and let's assume light comes from top right, okay? Because that's why the shadow casts to the left. So with the top plane of that box or cube, it's gonna be obviously the lightest, because that's being hit by the light from above, okay? Now everything that faces not towards the top, here, up here, is gonna be a little darker. So to darken it, I'm gonna grab a bunch of more blue and more of that neutral tint and keep the same kind of color and temperature. So this is me painting the shadow with pretty much the same color. This was almost like you'd paint monochromatically, okay? You preserve the temperature and the color and everything else. And it's one way that you'll often see shadows act in real life. The shadowy color is a similar version to the color of the object itself. So let's say that this is kind of a white-ish gray box. Physically, the material is a white-ish kind of gray color. You'd often see that this is kind of how the shadows and everything behaves, okay? Now, one thing you can do while this is silhouette, and I showed this in a recent short, is go ahead and darken some of the deeper areas here where it meets basically the ground, okay? So that's gonna be one way of doing it, preserving a similar color and temperature. Don't be misled by the fact that this is gray. It's still a color, it's a bluish gray. Now, I wanna show you one more way that I think is interesting, and that is temperature. So you probably heard very often how shadows are cooler than the let's say, more well-lit areas. It could be the case, not always. Sometimes the highlights are going to be cooler, like if you're reflecting a kind of neon sign or something like this. But sometimes there will be a difference in temperature that is geared towards light is warm, shadow is cool. So in that instance, we can grab a bit of our warm color. So that's going to be a bit of yellow ochre, maybe a bit of even pyrrole scarlet. Let's get this to be fairly warm. And we're going to start here at the top with this warm color. In fact, let me get a bit more pure yellow here. So we're gonna do this. Again, I'm unmiked, so sorry if there's a bit of an echo. The room is pretty empty too, as it's the new studio, still work in progress, so my apologies about that. We'll have to just add stuff in here to stop that echo from happening. But in any case, top is warm, and then look at what happens to that warmth mixture. I'm just gonna mix in the leftovers from previous painting sessions, maybe a bit of blue, just to get it to be a little cooler. And you know, the cool thing about this is you don't even need a big difference in the value to get this much darker, because the temperature already tells the story of how this is darker. This is more in the shadow, okay? And then as we move towards the left area, we're gonna really crank up the volume on the temperature and go much cooler. So then you get a transition. And if I wasn't clear enough, this side is the most well lit, this is a little shadowy, and this is the most shadowy, which is why we get this little pattern here, okay? And then if you want to get some areas to be extra dark, right near the corner or close to the base of the shadow, that's how you go for it. See a temperature difference. The shadow here is obviously cooler, than the highlight. Now, there's another way of shading, which doesn't necessarily have a clear-cut kind of formula, but I'm going to show you one way of doing it, which is complementary colors. So for our last little box, and I'm using the same object on purpose for consistency's sake, the only thing I'm changing really is the colors. Let me show you. Let's say that the top here is red. Let's say why? Because the place that gets hit by the light reflects back, or let's say projects back the red spectrum of color, which essentially means this box is probably red. It could be white and the light itself is red. And all of these factors go into consideration when you're kind of thinking about your colors. And again, I'm going to take you back to the first tip I gave you. You can always match the color. Look at it, see what it is, and try and match that, which is a skill in and of itself, something to talk about in a different video. But let me show you something cool. For the shadowy, slightly darker part, I'm going to add a bit of quinacridone rose, because that's naturally a little darker than the pyrrole scarlet I used for the first side of the cube. And in fact, I could probably go back and bring in some water to this area just to get it a little tad bit lighter. And we're going to continue here with this beautiful mix of quinacridone and pyrrole scarlet. But one more element I'm going to add to this is, believe it or not, the complementary color on the other side of the wheel, which is green, right? So I'm going to add a bit of green to that mix. Let's see what happens. Just a bit of green. My goal is not to neutralize, it's actually to add green to the look, okay? So, I'm gonna add a bit more of that green in here, and look at what happens. Look at how different this is from the rest of the examples in terms of richness of color. Because right now we have pretty much everything here. Two opposing colors, complementary colors on the color wheel, red and green. Right? And you can even crank up the pureness of the green and just make sure that it's more, again, green dominant, just by doing this kind of a thing here, pouring it in. What this does is it gives this another dimension. Okay, so because in this example, we're pretty much on the same monochromatic scale, so to speak. It's just the bluish gray to a darker bluish gray to a very dark bluish gray. On this scale, we're playing around with temperature, right? So we have the warm, and we have the cool. That's a terrible W, warm and cool. But here, we're doing something a little different, where we've added a third factor, or kind of foreign factor to the equation, which is this green, right? And what do we make of this? Is there a correct answer to what the color of the shadow should be? Which is a question I get all the time. How do I figure out the color of the shadow? The answer is there's no clear-cut answer. If you're aiming to paint it exactly as you see it, there is. Look at the reference photo, look at the thing, and try and match it as accurately as you can. However, most of the time, you'll find yourself changing these kinds of elements to enhance the impression you're after. So let's say you're looking to convey a strong sense of warmth and a strong sense of warm sunlight. In that instance, playing around with the temperature could be a good idea. Let's say you're just trying to convey the values more strictly speaking, and to show that the shadows kind of match the color of the object, you'll go with that. And let's say you want to be a little more creative, a little more inventive, you'll do something either like this, or like a burnt sienna, French ultramarine, or like orange blue, right? Or even yellow and purple, which is a very common combination. Purple is a very common shadow color, so to speak. So there isn't really one correct answer. And when painting and solving problems real time, you will find yourself making these decisions on the fly. So I want you to take this as a tool, and you want to make the boxes pop, just add a dark background. So I want you to take this tool of, okay, there isn't necessarily one correct answer for the color of my shadows, but what I do know there is the impression I'm trying to create. And depending on the impression you're trying to create, you're going to find yourself using different things. One of the common use cases for this is walls of buildings, especially light walls of buildings where the shadow, it's very hard to figure out. Is it the same color as the wall? Does it look a little warmer? Does it look a little cooler? At least now you know that warmth and coolness can be means at your disposal for conveying the message you're after. That's one. And two, maybe you want to go a little freer. So let's say your wall is a bit of a warm side. Maybe the shadow is a little blue. But I will give you one final tip. If you made it this far into the video, I really do appreciate it. Watch out for those strong saturated colors. Because very often one of the more amateurish things I've seen is people using very strong colors all over the painting. And what you'll find is you want to reserve these to specific areas. So if you go with a very yellow wall, and then you add a very blue shadow, it can look very beginner-like. But if you're able to turn this blue into this blue, a much more nuanced blue, they will communicate much better and the message will be better received by the viewer. Because you tell them the wall is slightly yellow and the shadow is a touch and nuance of a cool. And this painting actually is a good example of that boat painting in the background, lots of nuances in the light and shadow. So in any case, I hope you find this lesson helpful. Don't worry, I'm going to get things set up a little better with time and it's going to be perfect. I want to thank you. I want to encourage you, if you want to learn how to paint freely, let go, enjoy the painting process, let go of that rigidity, check out the frustration-free watercolor course, link in the description box below. If you want to learn how to paint realistically, get the values, the shapes, the edges, everything perfect, and create a realistic impression every single time using a formula I provide for you, be sure to check out the Watercolor Realism course. And if you just want to support me and you want your name credited at the end of the video, like it's going to happen in just a few moments, be sure to check out the Patreon, the cheapest tier, just $1, I believe. You can get your name at the end of my videos. There's 5, there's 10, there's the critiques tier. We really do appreciate it. There's the books on Amazon. And we'll talk to you again in the next vid real soon.